Hello and welcome. Major Dave here. Now first, let me thank you for your interest in election integrity and for taking the time to listen to my findings from the State Board of Elections data files for November's general election. I'm going to apologize from the outset that this is so long, but even at 20 minutes or so, I can only begin to scratch the surface of everything from the election data that just doesn't make sense. Now please set aside everything you've ever heard about Dominion, vote switching software, or suitcases of ballots being dragged from under a table in the dark of night. There's no evidence any of that took place in NC. But what did take place is something far simpler and yet much harder to detect. Now what I'm about to show you is compelling evidence, I believe, of data manipulation to fabricate an outcome far different than what the voters actually chose at the polls. You see, it's not just a matter of what the data says, but more importantly, when it says it, that reveals the changes that took place. Now, the evidence you'll see here is real data from the election archives, including voters' names and addresses. But let me emphasize, nothing you see or hear here in any way accuses those voters of any wrongdoing. Now, in fact, we have no way of knowing if they actually voted or not, but rather someone else just used their name and their voting record to fabricate a digital ballot for this election as if they did. Now, as you may recall from our reporting on the 2016 election, the only 4 council of state races that the Democrats won or held on to just happened to be the 4 with a statutory or constitutional role to play in the conduct of our elections or the investigations of any alleged voter fraud. The governor, attorney general, state auditor, and Secretary of State. Now these are the same 4 council of state positions they held on to in this election, and I cannot believe it is pure coincidence, and I also believe the data shows it isn't. Now to give you some context, understand there are 2 independent data streams that make up our election data. One comes from the poll book laptops at the precincts or one-stop sites that indicate who voted, where they voted, when they voted, and by what method. The other comes from the ballot tabulation machines that contain the candidates' names and the number of votes they received. They must be separate in order to preserve the secrecy of our ballot, or else someone could actually discover who you voted for. Now that said, what exists to protect us on the one hand also offers great opportunities for mischief, as I call them, on the other. Now, while protecting our privacy, it affords those with ill intent the ability to manipulate the data in both streams without there being any direct correlation between the 2. As long as you have enough valid ballots on the poll book side, frankly, you can make the numbers appear to be anything you wish in the results stream as long as they do not exceed that number of valid ballots. Now, I know most of you are likely interested in the governor's race, so let's take a look at that first. Now, as this graphic reflects, significant changes took place in the reported vote totals for both Roy Cooper and Dan Forrest between the morning of November 4th, the day after Election Day, and November 16th, the Monday after the canvass. Now, it's not so much in how many votes they received, but rather where they came from. During this period, Dan Forrest's results now say he got 46,749 less votes from by-mail ballots than it originally reported. Cooper's went down by only 7,000, but how could they go down at all? Then it also says Dan gained 61,700 more votes from one stop than originally reported, and Cooper gained 30,947. But before we get lost in the numbers, because none of us are going to remember them 5 minutes later anyway, they aren't the real issue. The question is, why were these numbers changing at all? Did the canvass really determine that this many votes were awarded in error of some sort? And these numbers don't include the votes for the other 2 candidates in that race that showed no such migration of votes in their totals. So we have nearly 90,000 more votes showing as coming from early voting and 53,000 less coming from by mail. Now this shifting of numbers is key to understanding the fraud that took place. And so there's no misunderstanding, this is where my numbers come from. These aren't my numbers. These are the state board's numbers. These are screen grabs from their website on the 4th of November on the left and the 11th of November on the right. And you can see the changes that took place. The board owns these numbers and they need to explain this change. But it doesn't end there. Similar migration was also taking place for candidates in the other Council of State races. This slide shows tens of thousands of votes from by-mail ballots for Republican candidates also disappearing, but massive votes from one stop being added to their totals. You know, here are 4 more races with similar changes, and then the last race is the same for Catherine Truitt. This shifting around of votes suggests there was a specific purpose to it. It didn't happen in a vacuum, and it wasn't clerical error, especially of this magnitude, because if it was, we'd be talking about why we bothered to use such an undependable system such as this in the first place. So then I computed the final margin of victory for all of the Council of State candidates, and that gave me a clue as to why all this shifting around was done. Take a look at the margin of victory for Josh Stein over Jim O'Neill in the Attorney General's race. Now, he had the smallest margin of victory of any Democrat over Republican challenger at a mere 10,623. But when you put this migration of votes side by side, you can see the cumulative swing in that margin of victory. And this is what puts Stein just beyond the 10,000 vote threshold to avoid an automatic recount, just like they did for Roy Cooper over Pat McCrory in 2016. Now, if the Democrats knew anything going into this election, it was the necessity of holding on to the only 4 Council of State seats that have a statutory or constitutional role to play in the conduct of our elections and the investigation of any election fraud: Governor, Attorney General, State Auditor, and Secretary of State. This data migration achieved exactly that. It moved the numbers just enough to guarantee a Stein victory and avoid an automatic recount. McCrory didn't have the money to pay for one, and I'm betting Jim O'Neill didn't either. But that's only tweaking the outcome on the ballot tabulation side. Now the task became to tweak the poll book data side to make it all look legitimate. So how was this done? And more importantly, when was it done? Well, let's start with the decision to withhold from the public the names of those who had requested a by-mail ballot, allegedly to stop the ballot harvesters. But it afforded those manipulating the data the perfect opportunity to tinker with this data and gave them plenty of time to do it. 2 whole months, in fact, from September 4th, when the first by-mail ballots were mailed out, until Election Day, when the whole list was released to the public. That's right. On the morning of Election Day, there were now over 500,000 more absentee ballot data records in the file than there were the day before. Now, we're supposed to believe these were all the by-mail ballot requests that had merely been redacted. But a closer look tells us there was a lot more to that data dump than meets the eye. I say that because the data also tells us that between November 1st, the day after the end of early voting, and November 10th, a week after Election Day, somehow another 20,934 more approved one-stop ballots appeared in the record. But it didn't end there. Between the 10th and the 14th, the day after canvass, another 2,719 more one-stop approved ballots appeared in the record, and nearly half from Duplin County alone. Now, folks, that can't be written off as clerical error, and they didn't appear all at once. There's an incremental adjustment to these records taking place. Now, that's 23,653 more one-stop ballots now showing as approved than was reported at the close of early voting. And this data dump paved the way for it. It isn't hard to hide 20 or 30,000 ballots in a data dump of over 500,000 records. Just enough to account for the swing I showed you earlier that pushed Josh Stein beyond the automatic recount threshold. Now, these records were later altered to reflect approved ballots that in all likelihood were never even cast. Other by-mail requests in that dump are pure fabrications, proven by the fact they were not spoiled at the time the voter instead showed up and voted in person at one stop. If they had been a legitimate by-mail request in the system at that time, it would have shown up in their records and have been spoiled before the in-person ballot could have been issued to them. But it wasn't. And why? Because it wasn't even in the record at the time they voted at one stop. Now, you want to see how easy it is to manipulate a voting record in the data files? Here's one of the ways. Let's take the record in the name of a Jabez Worthington in the Mecklenburg County data. Now, this shows the one-stop ballot recorded for him as voted on the first day of early voting, October 15th. Now, what flags it to me as a bogus record is that the ballot never appeared in the data files on any day since the day he allegedly voted, until the end of voting had already ended. Unlike all the other ballots cast at the same one-stop site on the same days that did manage to make it into the records. Theirs did, but his didn't. Doesn't sound right. Now, as you can see, it's there in the record on November 1st and 2nd. The column on the left is the date of the report that line of data comes from. But then, as you see on November 3rd, it's gone, and now it's replaced by two lines for him. And both show the same dates of request, same date sent, same date returned as his original approved ballot, but now the ballot status shows conflict on both lines. And those two records remain that way in each day's data file until after the Thanksgiving break, when the status again changes for both, only now one shows canceled and the other is accepted. This is the tweaking of that second data stream taking place for the poll book data I was telling you about. But this is only one of the several methods used to change the data. Now, here are some examples from Robeson County's data. In their data, we find one-stop ballots never before being reported, but show up for the first time in the record after the Thanksgiving holidays. Now, pay close attention to records numbers 2 and 3 for Noah Banks and Osasanaga Idahen. They both show up as same-day registrants. Their ballot doesn't appear until the report for December 9th, or so I thought. I came across their names again further down the list in Robeson, but this time with a completely different NC voter ID number. Now, the common problem they both share is that neither is a registered voter in Robeson County, despite their reported SDR status. Noah Banks has been a registered voter in Durham County since March 23rd of 2020. Yet this Robeson ballot still shows up in his absentee ballot and voter history sections of his Durham record as an accepted ballot for this election. Osasanaga Idahen has been a registered voter in Mecklenburg County since March 23rd of 2020. Yet this ballot still shows up in his absentee ballot and voter history sections of his Mecklenburg record as an accepted ballot. Did you catch it? Now, I didn't at first either. Is it a coincidence that they both registered to vote in their respective counties on the same day back in March? So if they were registered in another county, why did Robeson approve these ballots? Someone just switched the NCID numbers to tag it to a different record. Now, friends, election data manipulation really is just that easy. But the record says neither ballot should have been counted. Now, here are some more examples of one-stop ballots where two identical lines for each voter appeared as conflict in the record until after Thanksgiving, when one was changed to accepted and the other was changed to either wrong voter, canceled, or duplicate. Take your pick. And here are still more with status changes from Robeson, and more showing up after Thanksgiving for the first time. And if that isn't bad enough, Robeson made their last upload to the state on November 24th. So all that data and any changes to it would have been included in November 25th's report the next day. So where did this changed data after that come from, if not from some subsequent upload by the county? It's fabrication. It's tweaking. I mean, call it whatever you want, but I've been unable to find any plausible explanation of why or how all this could occur in the normal processing and reconciliation of election data. But now, just to show you I'm not picking on Robeson by any means, here are similar records with status changes from Pender County, and more one-stop ballots not showing up until Thanksgiving for the first time. I found many of the same as you can see here in Duplin County. And lo and behold, Halifax records was full of them too. And folks, the records like these number in the hundreds just between these 5 of our smaller counties. This is how easy it is to turn a bad ballot into a good one on the poll book side of the data streams if you're in the business of manipulating the tabulation data in the other stream. Now, I've talked to roughly a dozen counties, and none of them ever bothered to check what they uploaded against what the state is reporting they uploaded to ensure its accuracy. And I believe this should become an integral part of data management before certification in any future election. I know I probably bored you to tears by now, but folks, there are just so many pieces to this puzzle that it's hard to keep them all straight in your head, even when you deal with them daily as I do. So please keep that in mind if and when you speak to any of our legislators in Raleigh about this. They are not experts on elections just because they won one. Let them know you share their concerns over election integrity. Let them know you support anything they can get past Cooper's veto pen. Ask them what you can do to help make it happen. Now, I know none of us are going to see as much get done in Raleigh as we'd like, but our founders tried to keep politics away from the knee-jerk of radical and rapid changes in our laws. And frankly, it's hard to focus on a solution when even after 4 years, we're still trying to define the full range of all the problems. So to begin wrapping this up, I am not confident that the election outcome is a fair representation of what our fellow citizens actually marked on their ballots. You know, I wish I could prove that Dan Forrest was cheated out of being governor. But I simply do not have the capacity to dig that deep and actually prove it, although the data points to that being a very likely case. I think the answer can be found in time, but it's going to take someone with a badge and a court order to dig to the levels that I can't reach. So yes, I'm not persuaded at all that the outcome is legitimate in any respect. I'm not confident that the state board staff has acted to enhance transparency, because if anything, they've acted at every opportunity to obscure and inhibit any serious external effort at auditing their data. And this isn't the first time they've done this. Now, after 4 years of research, I firmly believe this system was actually designed to make such data manipulation possible, and that it has taken place routinely since 2006 when we switched to automated election data management. What I'm showing you is nothing more than digital ballot box stuffing, the creation of fake votes and ballots in the names of real voters to fabricate a desired outcome. It might also be relevant that the overwhelming majority of those voters whose records appear to have been fabricated or manipulated this way are all 70 years old or older. Those least likely to ever go online to check their ballot or to see if anyone else may have voted in their name. Now, it doesn't require fancy vote switching software as we're seeing in other states. All it takes is a system designed to make sure no one can ever balance it like a checkbook the way it should. Now, I'll save more detailed presentations of other key points of discrepancy for other videos because I've taken up enough of your time. But I hope you can conclude as I do from just this much. This whole system needs some serious sanitizing from top to bottom before we hold any more elections in North Carolina. Now, true, none of this changed the outcome we were told on election night. And if that still puzzles you, you missed the main point. The outcome wasn't changed. The outcome was fabricated from the outset. The changes you've seen were made to make it all look justified. You've now seen clear evidence of votes disappearing or moving from one type of ballot to another, and from Republican to Democrat candidates in the Council of State races. You've seen records appear out of thin air long after the normal reporting process should have revealed them if they were legitimate. And you've seen county data changing well after they made their last upload to the state. And you've seen who benefited from it the most and why. So again, I thank you for your time and your interest, because the future of our great state depends on our getting this mess fixed. I hope you found at least some of it coherent and convincing. You see, my biggest task in doing this is trying to make sense out of nonsense. It will be no easier for our legislators. They need our support as partners, not critics, in the efforts to clean this up. I can now say I've given it my all and done my best. And with that, may God richly bless you and the great state of North Carolina. May we all be found worthy of His blessings for having done the right thing when the baton was passed to us. So please like and share this on social media, and let's help get the word out to all of our neighbors. So until next time, stand firm and take care.